The Mafia boss roared with laughter, declaring he'd pay anyone their entire year's salary if they could decipher the message. But then, a quiet, unassuming waitress stepped forward, her unexpected skills silencing him and leaving the room in stunned awe. Subscribe now, because if you don't, this might just be our last rendezvous. Follow, comment, and share, and together, we'll navigate this treacherous path. Don't even think about missing out. Let's dive headfirst into this tangled web. The exclusive Italian restaurant, Salvatore's, buzzed with the hushed tones of New York's most powerful. Crystal chandeliers rained golden light upon crisp, white tablecloths and delicate china, while the impeccably trained waitstaff glided effortlessly between tables, masters of their craft. This was far more than just a restaurant. It was a carefully maintained neutral ground, a haven in a city carved up by invisible lines of influence and raw power. Lucy Rivers, a young woman with eyes that held a hint of both vulnerability and determination, nervously smoothed down her simple red apron, tucking a stray strand of light brown hair behind her ear. 6 months she'd spent at Salvatore's, and still, she felt like an outsider amidst the opulent displays of wealth. These patrons nonchalantly spent more on a single bottle of wine than she earned in 2 grueling weeks. Tonight, however, the tension was palpable, thicker than the rich aroma of truffle oil that usually permeated the air. The private section had been exclusively reserved for Alexander Moretti and his entourage. Even Lucy, who deliberately avoided the sensationalized local news, knew exactly who Alexander Moretti was. His name, whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence, followed him like a shadow. The heir apparent to the notorious Moretti crime family, the man who, before even hitting 30, had seized control of half of New York's sprawling underworld. Now, at 34, his mere presence was enough to make grown men cross the street, desperate to avoid even the briefest encounter. "Table 7 needs you," Sandra, the head waitress, hissed urgently, her eyes wide with a mixture of warning and barely concealed panic. "And Lucy, for God's sake, be perfect. That's the Moretti table." Lucy's stomach clenched into a tight knot as she approached table 7. 5 men, each a formidable presence in an impeccably tailored and undoubtedly expensive suit, sat around the mahogany table, nursing glasses of aged whiskey. Their conversation, a low rumble of hushed voices, ceased abruptly as she approached. But it was the man at the head of the table who effortlessly commanded every ounce of her attention. Alexander Moretti didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to flex his muscles. He possessed an innate aura of absolute control, an almost tangible power that hung in the air around him. His dark hair was slicked back with meticulous precision, framing a face that was both handsome and dangerous. A neatly trimmed beard shadowed his strong jawline, and his eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, hinting at depths unknown. The top buttons of his crisp white shirt were casually undone, revealing a glimpse of a subtle gold chain nestled against tan skin. A heavy gold watch, a statement of both wealth and authority, glinted on his wrist, sitting beside what appeared to be the edge of a complex tattoo disappearing beneath his tailored sleeve. "Another round," one of the men barked, not even bothering to meet her gaze. Lucy nodded with practiced professionalism, turning to leave when a snippet of conversation from the next table snagged her attention. A portly businessman, sweat beading on his forehead, was entertaining a group of obviously important international clients. "I apologize profusely," the businessman stammered, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I hired a translator, but they've unfortunately cancelled at the last minute." One of his guests responded in rapid-fire Italian, his tone laced with unmistakable frustration. The businessman looked increasingly uncomfortable, his career potentially hanging precariously in the balance of a crucial conversation he couldn't even begin to comprehend. Before Lucy could consciously stop herself, she took a tentative step toward their table. "Posso aiutare?" she offered in flawless Italian, her voice soft yet clear. "Can I help?" The foreign businessmen looked up in surprise, their faces etched with weary frustration. Then, relief washed over them in a palpable wave. One responded eagerly, launching into a detailed explanation of their predicament. Lucy nodded, her mind already translating. "He says they need to finalize the contract terms tonight, or they'll be forced to take their business elsewhere." She translated smoothly for the American businessman, her voice calm and assured. "You speak Italian?" the businessman exclaimed, his eyes wide with astonishment. "My grandmother was from Florence. I grew up speaking it at home," Lucy explained with a humble shrug, downplaying the years of dedicated study and the deep connection she felt to the language. What she hadn't noticed, lost in the urgency of the moment, was that the conversation at the Moretti table had ceased entirely. All eyes, including those of Alexander Moretti himself, were now fixed intently on her. $50,000 to anyone here who can translate what I'm about to say," Moretti suddenly announced, his voice cutting through the ambient restaurant noise with a subtle challenge that made the air crackle with anticipation. His men exchanged confused glances, their brows furrowed. This wasn't typical behavior for their notoriously controlled boss. A heavy silence descended upon the restaurant, every conversation dying mid-sentence. Several patrons who clearly understood the lucrative offer shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting nervously. Moretti's reputation preceded him, and even for such a staggering sum, most people preferred to avoid engaging with him directly, unwilling to risk the potential consequences. Lucy hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her rational mind screamed at her to walk away, to shrink back into the shadows, to remain as invisible as she'd always tried to be. But $50,000. That sum would cover her mother's mounting medical bills, the relentless financial burden that had been weighing down on her since the devastating diagnosis. "I'll translate," she said, the words barely a whisper, her voice softer than she intended. The corner of Moretti's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly, a hint of amusement playing on his lips as he locked eyes with her, his gaze intense and unnerving. He leaned slightly forward, his dark eyes boring into hers. Cosa vedi quando guardi un uomo come? Vedi il mostro che tu di temono o l'uomo che nessuno conosce? He asked in perfect Italian, his voice dropping to a husky timbre that seemed meant only for her ears. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. The question was unexpectedly personal, delving into depths she hadn't anticipated. What do you see when you look at a man like me? Do you see the monster everyone fears or the man no one knows? She could feel the weight of his gaze, assessing, calculating, stripping away her carefully constructed defenses. This wasn't just about translation. It was a test, a probe into her very soul, and she had no idea what he was searching for. He asked what I see when I look at a man like him. Lucy translated carefully, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. If I see the monster everyone fears or the man no one knows. A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or even a hint of vulnerability, crossed Moretti's features before his expression settled back into its carefully constructed mask of neutrality. The men around him exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with this uncharacteristic display from their typically unreadable boss. And what's your answer? Moretti asked, switching effortlessly to English. The smooth cadence of his voice a stark contrast to the dangerous undercurrent that ran beneath it. The question hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken implications, a silent challenge. Lucy should have been intimidated. Anyone else in her position would have been paralyzed by fear, but for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she met his gaze steadily, refusing to yield. I don't see either yet, she replied truthfully, her voice clear and unwavering. I don't know you well enough to see the man, and I make a point not to believe rumors about monsters. A beat of profound silence followed her words, the tension in the room so thick it could be cut with a knife. Then, Alexander Moretti did something that caused his men to stiffen in shock, their eyes widening in disbelief. He laughed, not a performative chuckle, not a menacing sound designed to instill fear, but a genuine, heartfelt laugh that momentarily transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the carefully constructed facade. Bring us another round, he said, dismissing her with a curt nod, the laughter gone as quickly as it had appeared. And the 50,000 is yours. I'll have it delivered tomorrow. Lucy returned to her duties, feeling his eyes follow her throughout the remainder of the evening, a silent weight on her back. She told herself the shiver that ran down her spine was simply from the restaurant's aggressive air conditioning, and not from the unnerving intensity of his gaze. By closing time, the Moretti party had departed, leaving a palpable void in their wake. Lucy was diligently wiping down tables, her mind still reeling from the night's bizarre events, when Sandra approached, her face ashen. What did you say to Alexander Moretti? She whispered urgently, her eyes wide with apprehension. Nothing important, Lucy mumbled, trying to downplay the encounter. He left this for you, Sandra said, her voice barely audible. She pressed a business card into Lucy's trembling hand. Thick black cardstock, devoid of any embellishment except for a single phone number embossed in elegant gold lettering. He left this for you, Lucy. Do you have any idea who he is? What he does? Men like Alexander Moretti don't notice women like us unless they want something. Lucy turned the card over in her hands, the stark blackness feeling ominous against her skin. He's just another rich customer, she insisted, trying to convince herself more than Sandra. Sandra gripped her arm tightly, her fingers digging into Lucy's flesh. He's not just rich, Lucy. He's dangerous. The kind of dangerous that makes people disappear without a trace. The Moretti family doesn't run legitimate businesses. They run an empire built on things we pretend not to see. Don't call that number. Just promise me you won't call that number. Lucy slipped the card into her pocket, offering a reassuring nod to Sandra, hoping to ease her friend's obvious anxiety. But as she left the restaurant that night, the weight of the card seemed to burn against her thigh, a heavy reminder of the dangerous world she'd inadvertently stumbled into. $50,000 would solve so many of her problems, alleviate so much of her mother's suffering, but at what cost? 2 days later, Lucy opened her apartment door to find a sleek black envelope resting on her doormat, its presence instantly unsettling. Inside was a check for exactly $50,000, made out in her name, and a handwritten note on heavy, expensive cardstock. A debt honored is a reputation maintained. The translation was worth every penny. Lucy stared at the check, her hands trembling slightly. How had he found her address? The implication sent a chill through her, a cold wave that was equal parts fear and something else, something she couldn't, or wouldn't, name. What she didn't know then, as she stood holding a check that could potentially change her life, was that Alexander Moretti never did anything without a carefully calculated purpose. His unexpected appearance at Salvatore's that night was about to irrevocably entangle their lives in ways that neither of them could have possibly anticipated. Because while Lucy had been focused solely on translating his words, Alexander had been captivated by the sheer impossibility of her existence. A woman who looked him directly in the eye without a flicker of fear, who spoke the ancient language of his ancestors with the ease of a native, and who had absolutely no idea that her mere presence had just disrupted years of meticulously laid plans, threatening to unravel his carefully constructed world. Lucy hadn't expected to see Alexander Moretti again. Their brief arrangement had been fulfilled, the translation completed, the payment promptly made. She tucked the business card into her dresser drawer, unworn and largely forgotten. A stark reminder of a strange, unsettling chapter she desperately hoped was now closed. Then came the flowers, an absolutely breathtaking arrangement of pure white lilies delivered directly to Salvatore's during her shift, accompanied by a simple, elegant card. Thank you for your assistance. Just how well do you know Alexander Moretti? Sandra asked, her voice laced with suspicion as she eyed the extravagant arrangement with a wary gaze. I don't, Lucy insisted, trying to sound more convincing than she felt. I just helped with a translation, that's all. It was a one-time thing. Lucy. Sandra lowered her voice, glancing around nervously to ensure they weren't being overheard. People who get involved with the Moretti family don't just walk away when the job is done. It doesn't work that way. Be careful, Lucy. Please. Lucy desperately wanted to dismiss Sandra's concerns, to reassure her that she was simply being overly dramatic. But the nagging sense that she'd inadvertently stepped into something far larger and far more dangerous than herself wouldn't subside. A knot of unease tightening in her stomach. That night, driven by a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, she finally searched Alexander Moretti online. The search results were a carefully curated study in stark contrasts. On paper, Alexander Moretti was a legitimate businessman, a highly successful CEO of Moretti Holdings, with extensive interests in real estate, import, export, and luxury hospitality. His public image was meticulously cultivated, carefully crafted to project an image of respectability and power. Occasional appearances at high-profile charity events, carefully chosen quotes in prestigious business magazines, impeccably staged photographs of him looking imperious in bespoke suits. Every detail was meticulously controlled. But lurking just beneath the polished veneer of legitimacy were the whispered stories, the hushed rumors, the unsettling disappearances of business rivals who dared to cross him, territories controlled through intimidation and violence, rather than legally binding contracts. A family history stretching back to the original 5 families of New York's organized crime syndicate. Lucy scrolled through article after article, piecing together the fragmented public narrative of the enigmatic man she'd encountered. Born into unimaginable power, raised to ruthlessly command it, Alexander Moretti had taken control of the family business at the remarkably young age of 25, when his father ostensibly retired to a lavish estate in Sicily. Under his ruthless leadership, the Moretti empire had expanded exponentially, becoming more sophisticated, more deeply entrenched, and more insulated from any legal scrutiny. What none of the articles mentioned, what no public record could ever capture, was the unnerving intensity in his eyes when he looked at her, or the almost imperceptible way his carefully controlled demeanor had cracked, just slightly, when she'd stood her ground, refusing to be intimidated. Lucy was so completely absorbed in her unsettling research that she almost missed the soft, barely audible knock at her door. Peeking cautiously through the peephole, she found a familiar figure standing in the dimly lit hallway. Vito, Alexander Moretti's ever-present driver and enforcer. Mr. Moretti requests your presence, he said when she cautiously opened the door, his tone making it abundantly clear that this wasn't entirely optional, more of a carefully worded command than a polite request. It's nearly midnight, Lucy protested, her mind racing with a mixture of fear and reluctant curiosity. It's urgent, was Vito's only explanation, his face impassive and unreadable. Every rational thought in Lucy's brain screamed at her to refuse, to slam the door shut and call the police, to sever all ties to this dangerous world she had no business being involved in. But an undeniable curiosity, coupled with something else, something she wasn't quite ready to name or acknowledge, ultimately won out. 20 minutes later, she was seated in the back of the now familiar black car, the tinted windows obscuring her from the outside world. Where are we going? She asked, her voice betraying her anxiety. Mr. Moretti is at his penthouse, Vito answered, his gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead. He apologizes for the late hour, but it couldn't be helped. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of one of Manhattan's most exclusive residential towers, a monument to wealth and power. The private elevator opened directly into a vast living space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the glittering cityscape, a dizzying expanse of light stretching as far as the eye could see. The decor was aggressively masculine and minimalist, all clean lines, dark wood, and muted colors, reflecting a sense of stark control and unwavering authority. Alexander Moretti stood by the windows, his back to her, his imposing silhouette outlined against the dazzling city lights. He discarded his suit jacket and tie, his crisp white shirt sleeves casually rolled up to reveal powerful forearms marked with intricate tattoos, a complex tapestry of symbols she didn't recognize, intertwined with what looked like significant dates. Thank you for coming, he said without turning around, his voice low and resonant. Did I have a choice? Lucy asked, remaining near the elevator, ready to bolt if necessary. He finally turned, and she was struck once again by the unnerving intensity of his gaze, a force that seemed to penetrate her very soul. There's always a choice, Lucy, he said softly, his eyes searching hers, even when it doesn't feel like it. It was the first time he'd used her first name, and the unexpected intimacy of it caught her completely off guard, sending a shiver down her spine. Why am I here? She asked, remaining rooted to the spot, wary of venturing any further into his territory. Because I needed to speak with you somewhere private, he replied, his voice softening slightly as he crossed to a sleek sideboard where crystal decanters caught the low light, their facets glinting like captured stars. Drink? Lucy shook her head, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. I'd prefer answers. Alexander poured himself 2 fingers of amber liquid, swirling the glass gently as he studied its contents. The Rossi family, he began, his voice carefully neutral, had connections to certain organizations in Florence, organizations that eventually became adversaries of my family. Lucy frowned, confused by the sudden change in subject. I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? Your grandmother, Sophia Rossi, correct? He paused, his gaze unwavering. An uneasy feeling settled in Lucy's stomach, a cold dread creeping through her veins. How do you know her name? The same way I know she left Florence in 1962 under rather complicated circumstances, he replied, his voice smooth as silk. The same way I know she changed her name when she arrived in America, shedding her past like a snake sheds its skin. The same way I know that your mother never told you the whole story, carefully guarding secrets she didn't even fully understand. Lucy's hands clenched at her sides, her knuckles turning white. My grandmother was a seamstress who came to America for a better life, she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. There's no story beyond that. You're mistaken. Alexander took a slow sip of his drink. His eyes never leaving hers, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken truths. The Rossis weren't just any family in Florence, Lucy. They controlled the north side of the city for 3 generations, their influence extending into every facet of Florentine society. Your grandmother was the last surviving member after a particularly bloody territory dispute, a brutal clash that decimated her entire family. Lucy felt as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet, the luxurious penthouse suddenly transforming into a dizzying abyss. That's not possible. My grandmother was... She trailed off, memories suddenly rearranging themselves into a new, disturbing pattern, long-forgotten details resurfacing with chilling clarity. Her grandmother's insistence on teaching her Italian, the mysterious phone calls that came in the dead of night, the way she always subtly positioned herself with her back to the wall in restaurants, as if constantly on guard. Your grandmother was the daughter of Antonio Rossi, one of the most feared men in Florence. Alexander continued, his voice devoid of emotion, merely stating a fact. When the rival families moved against the Rossis, they killed everyone. Everyone except Sophia, who managed to escape with the help of a loyal ally, vanishing into thin air. Why are you telling me this? Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible. Alexander set down his glass with a soft click and moved closer, stopping only when he saw her instinctively step back, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Because Don Ritchie recognized your name, a name that hasn't been spoken aloud in decades, and because the Rossi bloodline was thought to be extinct, wiped from the face of the earth. Your very existence complicates matters, Lucy. Complicates what? She asked, her voice trembling. Territorial agreements, legacy claims, old blood debts that have been simmering beneath the surface for generations. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a surprisingly human gesture from a man who otherwise seemed carved from stone. The old families have long memories, Lucy, and whether you like it or not, whether you choose to embrace it or reject it, you're inextricably linked to that history. You're a part of it now. Lucy shook her head vehemently, denial rising in her throat like bile. No, I'm not. I'm just a waitress who happens to speak Italian. That's all I am. I have nothing to do with any of this. Alexander's eyes softened fractionally, a hint of something that might have been compassion flickering within their depths. I wish it were that simple, Lucy. I truly do. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded photograph, offering it to her with a deliberate slowness, giving her the opportunity to refuse. Lucy took it reluctantly, her fingers brushing against his. The black and white image showed a group of men in dark suits standing on the steps of an ornate building, their faces grim and determined. In the center, however, was a man with a familiar smile, a smile she recognized instantly, a smile that mirrored her grandmother's. Antonio Rossi, Alexander confirmed, watching her face intently. Your great-grandfather. Lucy stared at the photograph, unable to reconcile the shocking revelation with everything she believed to be true about her family, her carefully constructed reality crumbling around her. What does this mean for me? Why should I care about old family feuds and vendettas? This has nothing to do with me. Because Don Ritchie isn't the only one who recognized your name, Alexander said, his voice laced with warning. And not everyone who remembers the Rossis will be as civilized in their curiosity, as willing to extend you the benefit of the doubt. A chill ran through Lucy, deeper and more profound than anything she'd ever experienced. Are you saying I'm in danger? Alexander moved to the window again, his gaze sweeping over the city he controlled, a vast empire built on secrets and shadows. I'm saying that knowledge is protection, Lucy, and I'm also saying that you now have my undivided attention. Whether that proves to be a blessing or a curse remains to be seen. The implication hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. His attention could be a shield, a powerful force protecting her from the storm that was brewing. Or it could be a sentence, a gilded cage from which there was no escape. I don't want any part of this world, Lucy said firmly, her voice trembling slightly but resolute. I want to go back to my life, back to the way things were before I knew any of this. Unfortunately, Lucy, it's not about what either of us wants anymore, Alexander said, his voice devoid of emotion. This is a game you can't simply opt out of now that you've been recognized. The pieces have already been set in motion, and you're now a key player whether you like it or not. So what do I do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. You let me help you, he said, his eyes locking with hers. Lucy gave a hollow laugh. Why would you help me? Our families were enemies. According to you anyway. Were, Alexander emphasized, his lips twisting into a sardonic smile. The past is the past, Lucy. I'm far more concerned with the present, and with ensuring that the delicate balance I've maintained in the city isn't disrupted by your sudden and unexpected appearance. You represent a threat to that balance, a wild card that could destabilize everything. I'm hardly disruptive, Lucy protested, her voice laced with indignation. I'm just trying to survive. The ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. You disrupted an entire restaurant simply by existing, Lucy. You disrupted my men who haven't seen me laugh in years. And you most certainly disrupted me. The last words were spoken so quietly, so softly, that she almost missed them entirely, their hushed intimacy sending a jolt through her. Before Lucy could respond, before she could even begin to process the weight of his words, Alexander's phone chimed, shattering the fragile moment. He checked it, his expression hardening, all traces of warmth vanishing from his face, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity. We have to go, he said, his voice suddenly all business again. There's a situation that requires my immediate attention. What kind of situation? Lucy asked, though she wasn't sure she truly wanted to know, a sense of dread settling heavily in her stomach. Alexander hesitated, seemingly weighing how much to reveal, how much to trust her with. The kind that makes knowing who you are even more important right now, he said finally, his voice grim. He crossed to a closet, retrieving his suit jacket and sliding it on with practiced ease, the transformation from approachable to impenetrable happening in mere seconds. Vito will take you home. Stay there, Lucy. Don't answer your door or your phone unless it's me. I'll have men watching your apartment, ensuring your safety. You're scaring me, Lucy admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander paused, then approached her slowly, as one might approach a skittish animal, his movements deliberate and controlled. He reached out, his fingertips just barely brushing her cheek in a touch so light it might have been imagined, a fleeting connection that sent a jolt of electricity through her. Good, he said softly, his dark eyes searching hers. Fear keeps people alive in my world. It's a necessary instinct. Before she could react to the unexpected contact, before she could decipher the meaning behind his words, he had stepped back, the professional distance restored, the brief moment of intimacy erased as if it had never happened. I'll contact you tomorrow, he said, guiding her firmly toward the elevator. In the meantime, think about what I've told you. Ask yourself why your grandmother never shared her past with your mother, why she insisted on teaching you Italian so perfectly. Ask yourself what she was hiding and why. In the car, Lucy sat in stunned silence, the events of the night replaying in her mind. A chaotic jumble of shocking revelations and unsettling encounters. The photograph of Antonio Rossi burned in her pocket like a brand, forever connecting her to a history she'd never known existed. A legacy of violence and intrigue she desperately wanted to escape. Back at her apartment, she doubled the locks on the door and drew the curtains tight, suddenly acutely aware of how exposed she felt, how easily her life could be turned upside down. Sleep eluded her as she tossed and turned, her mind racing with a million questions that had no easy answers, a sense of impending doom hanging over her like a shroud. Morning brought no clarity, only the bone-deep certainty that her life had irrevocably changed, that she could never go back to the simple, uncomplicated existence she had once known. She called in sick to work, unable to face the mundane reality of Salvatore's, the clatter of dishes and the trivial conversations, when her entire understanding of herself had been shattered, when the very foundations of her identity had been shaken to their core. By noon, restlessness drove her to the one place she thought might hold some semblance of truth, some tangible connection to her past. Her mother's house in Queens, where boxes of her grandmother's belongings still sat untouched in the dusty attic, a forgotten archive of a life she had never fully understood. Her mother was at work, but Lucy still had a key, a silent symbol of their enduring bond. The house was quiet and familiar, a sanctuary seemingly untouched by the dangerous revelations of the previous night, a haven of comforting normalcy. In the attic, motes of dust danced in the shafts of sunlight filtering through the grimy windows as Lucy pulled box after box from the eaves, her hands trembling slightly, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't even sure what she was searching for, what hidden clues she hoped to find amidst the clutter. In the third box, beneath layers of carefully preserved clothing, Lucy discovered a false bottom, cleverly concealed beneath a layer of delicate lace. Her heart racing, she pried it open to reveal a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, a tarnished silver locket, its surface scratched and worn, and a brittle, yellowed envelope, its contents unknown. The journal was written in an elegant, almost archaic Italian that would take time and dedication to decipher, its words hinting at secrets and hidden passions. The locket contained a miniature photograph of a handsome young man in a military uniform, his eyes full of youthful optimism, a stark contrast to the darkness that now surrounded her. But it was the contents of the envelope that made Lucy's blood run cold, that solidified her worst fears and confirmed the shocking truth of Alexander Moretti's words. Inside, she found official documentation of a name change from Sofia Rossi to Sophie Ross, dated 1962, meticulously filed and legally binding, and a faded newspaper clipping reporting the brutal massacre of the Rossi family in Florence, with Sofia Rossi tragically listed among the dead, a victim of the senseless violence. Her grandmother had faked her own death, meticulously constructing a new identity in order to escape to America, to leave behind the bloodshed and the betrayals. Everything Alexander had told her was chillingly true. Lucy was so completely absorbed in her shocking discovery, so lost in the unraveling of her family's carefully guarded secrets, that she didn't hear the front door open, didn't realize she was no longer alone until a long shadow suddenly fell across the attic floor, engulfing her in darkness. I told you to stay in your apartment, Alexander said from the doorway, his voice dangerously low, his anger barely controlled, a coiled spring ready to unleash. Lucy scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. How did you find me? How did you know I was here? The same way I found your address, he said, his gaze sweeping over her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. I have people watching you, Lucy. I have eyes and ears everywhere. I told you you're not safe. Under different circumstances, she might have been outraged at this blatant invasion of her privacy, at the knowledge that she was being constantly monitored, her every move scrutinized. Now, however, she could only stare at him, her mind reeling from the weight of her discoveries. The evidence of her grandmother's elaborate deception spread around her like accusatory fingers. You were telling the truth, she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. All of it. I rarely lie, Lucy, Alexander replied, his anger seeming to dissipate slightly as he took in her stunned expression, the shock and disbelief etched on her face. It's inefficient, and it complicates matters unnecessarily. He crossed to where she stood, kneeling beside her to examine the items she'd unearthed, his movements surprisingly gentle. His fingers hovered over the journal without actually touching it, a strange reverence in his gesture, a silent acknowledgement of the weight of history contained within its fragile pages. This could be valuable, he murmured, his eyes narrowed in thought. The Rossis were known for their extensive network of informants, their intricate web of contacts stretching throughout Florence and beyond. Their records, their detailed accounts of their operations, were believed to have been lost in the devastating fire that destroyed their estate. But if this journal contains even a fraction of that information? Lucy looked at him sharply, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Is that why you're interested in me? For whatever information my grandmother might have left behind. For whatever secrets I might unknowingly possess. Alexander's eyes met hers, his gaze surprisingly earnest, his expression unreadable. That's part of it, Lucy, he admitted, his voice low and sincere. But not all of it. What's the rest? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He reached out slowly, giving her ample time to pull away if she chose, and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch feather-light. You intrigue me, Lucy Rivers, he said, his voice a husky murmur. Or should I say, Lucy Rossi? You've lived your entire life unaware of who you really are, of the power that runs through your veins. Yet, you carry yourself with the innate confidence of your bloodline, with a strength and resilience that belies your quiet demeanor. You're a mystery, Lucy, a puzzle I find myself compelled to solve. The compliment, if that's what it was, left Lucy unsure how to respond, her mind reeling from the conflicting emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. I'm still the same person I was yesterday, she insisted, her voice trembling slightly but resolute. Nothing has changed. I'm still just Lucy Rivers, a waitress from Queens. Alexander shook his head slowly, his dark eyes searching hers. Knowledge changes us, Lucy. It shapes us, molds us, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. You can't unlearn your history, you can't simply erase the past. The blood of the Rossis flows through your veins, whether you choose to acknowledge it or not. I can choose not to be defined by it, she countered, her chin lifting defiantly. I can choose to forge my own path, to create my own destiny, separate from the violence and the betrayals of the past. A smile tugged at his lips, a flicker of genuine amusement lighting up his eyes. That's exactly what I'd expect a Rossi to say, he said softly, his voice laced with admiration. Before Lucy could retort, before she could challenge his assumptions and reaffirm her independence, Alexander's phone rang, its insistent chime shattering the fragile moment. His expression darkened as he answered it, listening briefly before issuing a curt order and hanging up, his face grim. We need to leave, Lucy, he said, all traces of warmth and tenderness vanishing from his voice, replaced by a cold, professional detachment. Now, there's no time to argue. What's wrong now? She asked, her stomach twisting into a tight knot of apprehension. Someone else has connected the dots, Lucy. Someone else has recognized your name, and they're not as patient or as forgiving as Don Ritchie. Someone who remembers the Rossis less fondly. Someone who has a vested interest in seeing your bloodline extinguished. Fear clenched in Lucy's stomach, a cold, paralyzing grip that threatened to suffocate her. Who? The Bianca family, Alexander replied grimly, his eyes narrowed with a dangerous glint. They're the ones who orchestrated the hit on your family back in the 60s, the ones who wiped out the Rossis and seized control of their territory. And now, their heir apparent Marco Bianca has returned to New York after hearing rumors of a surviving Rossi, a threat to his power. Lucy gathered the journal, the locket, and the documentation, stuffing them haphazardly into her bag, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grip the items. What does he want with me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. To finish what his grandfather started, to eliminate the last vestige of the Rossis and solidify his family's dominance, Alexander said grimly, his eyes unwavering. Or to use you as leverage in negotiations with me, to force my hand and weaken my position. Either way, you're not safe here, Lucy. You're a target and you need to disappear. I'm not going anywhere with you, Lucy insisted, even as she continued gathering her grandmother's belongings, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts and desperate plans. I need to warn my mother. She has a right to know the truth. If these people are as dangerous as you say, your mother is already being watched, Lucy. Alexander cut in, his tone brooking no argument. My men are already on their way to secure her safety, to ensure she's protected from any potential harm. The safest thing you can do for her is to come with me now, to disappear before the Biancs can find you. They'll target you first, Lucy, to draw me out, to force me to expose my hand. You're the bait, and they're the predators. Don't give them the satisfaction. Lucy, do you expect this situation to last? Alexander's jaw tightened, the muscle flexing with suppressed tension. Until Marco Bianca is no longer a threat. The weight of those words settled between them, heavy and unspoken. Lucy turned to the window, watching her mother's familiar neighborhood in Queens recede as the SUV sped away. The ordinary streets, the corner deli, the bodega she'd visited countless times. They seemed a lifetime away now, impossibly distant from the dangerous world she'd been plunged into. Where are we going? She asked, breaking the silence that had stretched for what felt like an eternity. One of my properties upstate, Alexander replied, his voice devoid of inflection. It's secure, remote, and untraceable. My name isn't connected to it in any public records. The cityscape gradually dissolved into suburbs, then the rolling hills and dense forests of upstate New York. Lucy watched the transformation, each passing mile severing another tie to her old life. The weight of what she'd left behind pressed down on her, a suffocating blanket of regret and fear. 2 hours later, the SUV turned onto a private road, a narrow ribbon of asphalt winding through the thick woods. Finally, the trees parted, revealing a clearing where a stunning modern structure of glass and stone seemed to rise organically from the landscape. It wasn't like the gaudy, ostentatious mansions favored by the nouveau riche. This house was understated in its luxury, designed to blend seamlessly with nature while offering uncompromising security. High-tech surveillance cameras were cleverly integrated into the architecture, nearly invisible to the casual observer. The grounds themselves offered no cover for anyone attempting an approach. It's beautiful, Lucy murmured, the words escaping her lips almost involuntarily as they pulled into a covered garage. My mother designed it, Alexander said, a surprising softness creeping into his voice. She believed true power didn't need to shout to be effective. Inside, the house was a study in restrained elegance. Clean lines, natural materials, and floor-to-ceiling windows framed the surrounding forest like living art. A housekeeper appeared silently, taking Lucy's bag with a practiced efficiency. Enzo and Vito, ever vigilant, conducted a security sweep, their movements smooth and coordinated. You'll be staying in the East Wing, Alexander informed her, leading her through the main living area. My mother's old suite. It has its own terrace and study. I thought you might want to examine your grandmother's journal there. The suite was lovely, airy, and surprisingly feminine for a Moretti property. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the delicate fabrics and antique furniture. The sitting room opened onto a private terrace overlooking a small, shimmering lake. The bedroom featured a canopied bed and an antique vanity that Lucy imagined must have belonged to Alexander's mother. There are clothes in the closet, Alexander said, lingering in the doorway. My assistant guessed your size. If anything doesn't fit, let Maria know. Lucy placed her grandmother's journal on a side table, suddenly overwhelmed by the surreal nature of her situation. Alexander, she began, using his first name without thinking. What happens now? His expression softened almost imperceptibly at the sound of his name on her lips. Now you stay here where it's safe while I deal with Marco Bianca and my mother. My job, my life. Your mother believes you've taken a leave of absence for a health retreat, courtesy of a generous regular at Salvatore. Your job will be held for you. He paused, his gaze intense. As for your life, that depends on what we learn from your grandmother's journal and how quickly I can resolve the Bianca situation. Lucy sank onto the edge of the bed, the full weight of the changes in her life finally crashing down on her. I didn't ask for any of this. Few of us ask for the lives we're born into, Alexander replied, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. We simply make the best of the hand we're dealt. When Lucy looked up, she saw something in his eyes she hadn't noticed before. Understanding, perhaps even empathy. For a fleeting moment, she glimpsed the man beneath the power, the human being behind the feared name. I'll leave you to rest, he said, retreating towards the doorway. Dinner is at 7 if you feel up to joining me. Otherwise, Maria will bring a tray. After he left, Lucy explored the suite, discovering the closet filled with clothing in exactly her size. Simple, elegant pieces that suited her taste perfectly. The bathroom was stocked with high-end toiletries, and a sleek laptop sat on the desk in the study, its newness suggesting it had been purchased specifically for her. The level of preparation was both thoughtful and unsettling. How long had Alexander been planning to bring her here? How much had he known about her before that night at Salvatore? With these questions swirling in her mind, Lucy turned to her grandmother's journal. The code was complex, but she recognized patterns from the secret language they'd shared as a child. Slowly, she began to decipher the entries, losing herself in her grandmother's hidden past. Hours passed as Lucy pieced together the truth of Sofia Rossi's life. Her position as the daughter of a powerful family, her forbidden romance with a young man from a neutral faction, the betrayal that led to her family's destruction, and her harrowing escape to America with the help of an unnamed ally from the Moretti family. The final entry, dated a week before Sofia's official death, contained a chilling warning. Asterisk, if you are reading this, it means our enemies have found you. Trust no one except those who bear the mark of the falcon. The Moretti falcon is bound by blood oath to protect the last of the Rossi line. This is a debt that transcends generations. Lucy stared at the words, then at the ornate falcon insignia subtly embossed on the leather cover. The same falcon she glimpsed tattooed on Alexander's forearm. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Maria stood there, a concerned expression etched on her lined face. Miss, it's past 8. Mr. Moretti asked me to check if you would like dinner brought up. Lucy realized she'd completely lost track of time. I'm sorry, I was absorbed in reading. I'll come down. She found Alexander in the dining room, his jacket discarded and sleeves rolled up, working on a laptop while a meal waited untouched. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral despite the fleeting glimpse of something akin to relief in his eyes. I wasn't sure you'd join me, he said, closing the laptop. Lucy took the seat across from him, noting how the table had been set for an intimate dinner despite its capacity to seat 12. I found something in my grandmother's journal that I think you should explain. Alexander raised an eyebrow in silent question. She wrote about a blood oath between the Rossis and the Moretts, a falcon mark. Lucy gestured to his forearm, where she knew the tattoo lurked beneath his sleeve. Like the one you have. For a long moment, Alexander was silent, weighing his response. Then, he slowly rolled up his left sleeve to reveal the tattoo in its entirety. An intricately detailed falcon with wings spread in protection over what Lucy now recognized as the Rossi family crest. The oath was taken by my grandfather, he explained quietly. Your great-grandfather saved his life during a conflict with a common enemy. In return, he swore that the Moretts would always protect the Rossi bloodline if called upon. He paused, his gaze locking with hers. And now, I'm upholding that oath. He rotated his arm to show a date tattooed beneath the falcon. The day they'd met at Salvatore. When I realized who you were, I added this, a reminder of when my obligation began. Lucy stared at the tattoo, a strange emotion constricting her throat. So all of this, bringing me here, protecting me, it's just about honoring some decades-old promise? Alexander's eyes darkened. Initially, yes. He held her gaze, something dangerous and unspoken passing between them. And now, it's more complicated. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an awareness that had nothing to do with family histories or blood oaths. Lucy was acutely aware of his physical presence across the table, The controlled power in his shoulders, the intensity in his eyes, the almost imperceptible softening of his mouth when he looked at her. "You hardly know me," she said softly. "I know enough," he countered, his voice low and husky. "I know you're brave enough to look me in the eye when men twice your size can't. I know you're loyal enough to worry about your mother's safety before your own. I know you're intelligent enough to decipher a code that has stumped experts for decades." He reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of touching hers. "And I know that when I'm with you, I feel something I haven't felt in a very long time." "What's that?" Lucy asked, her voice barely audible. "Possibility," Alexander answered simply. The word hung between them, fraught with implications. Lucy felt herself drawn to him despite every rational thought warning her away. This man was dangerous not just because of his position or power, but because of how he made her feel, like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, one step away from a fall that would change everything. Before either could act on the tension building between them, Alexander's phone vibrated on the table. His expression hardened as he read the message. "Marco Bianca has made contact," he said, all softness vanishing from his voice. "He's requesting a meeting." "What does that mean?" Lucy asked, the fragile moment shattered. "It means he's willing to negotiate." Alexander's eyes met hers, cold and calculating once more. "He's offering terms." "What kind of terms?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "A marriage alliance between you and his son." Lucy's stomach dropped. "That's medieval." "It's business," Alexander corrected, though the disgust in his tone belied his words. "Old families still operate by old rules. Marco is trying to legitimize his claim to former Rossi territories by binding your bloodline to his. And if I refuse, then negotiations fail, and we move to less civilized methods of conflict resolution." Lucy pushed away from the table, suddenly unable to sit still. "This is insane. I can't be bartered away like some medieval princess." Alexander rose as well, his height and presence filling the space between them. "No one is bartering you away, Lucy. I won't accept his terms." "Why not? Isn't that the simplest solution to your problem?" Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Because you're under my protection." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Because the oath I honor gives me the right to refuse any claim on your behalf." "And what if I decided to accept?" Lucy challenged, tilting her chin up defiantly. "To end this situation?" In one fluid movement, Alexander closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cradle her face with surprising gentleness. "You won't," he said with absolute certainty. "You don't know what I'll do," Lucy whispered, even as she found herself leaning into his touch. "I know that the same fire that helped your grandmother escape death runs in your veins," he murmured, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "You won't surrender to threats. It's not in your nature." Their faces were inches apart now, his eyes dark with an emotion Lucy was afraid to name. She should step away, maintain the distance that sanity demanded. Instead, she found herself swaying closer, drawn by a force that defied logic. "Alexander," she breathed, unsure if it was a question or a warning. He answered by closing the final distance between them, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly blazed into something fierce and consuming. His arms enveloped her, strong and secure, as her hands found their way to his shoulders, then his hair, fingers tangling in the dark strands. The kiss deepened, years of Alexander's carefully maintained control crumbling as Lucy responded with equal fervor. This was madness. She hardly knew him. He was dangerous in ways she was only beginning to understand. But in this moment none of that mattered. There was only the heat of his body against hers, the taste of him, the surprising tenderness in the way he held her as if she were something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Lucy saw a raw vulnerability in Alexander's eyes, an expression she suspected few had ever witnessed. "This complicates things," he said, his voice rough. Lucy gave a small, breathless laugh. "I think things were already complicated." Alexander brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering against her cheek. "I won't let anything happen to you, Lucy, not because of an oath, not because of your bloodline, but because—" He stopped, seeming unable to find the words for whatever was growing between them. "Because," Lucy prompted softly. Before Alexander could answer, a security alarm blared through the house. His expression transformed instantly, all tenderness replaced by cold calculation. "Stay here," he ordered, already moving towards the door, his hand reaching inside his jacket to extract a gun she hadn't known he was carrying. "What's happening?" Lucy asked, fear cutting through the lingering warmth of their embrace. Alexander's eyes met hers one last time, his gaze intense. "It seems Marco Bianca wasn't as interested in negotiating as I thought." The last thing Lucy saw before security personnel ushered her to a panic room was Alexander striding purposefully towards danger. His posture that of a man fully in his element, the dangerous, powerful figure the world feared, not the man who had just held her with such unexpected gentleness. And in that moment, Lucy finally understood the dual nature that had confounded her from the beginning. Both versions were real, the ruthless leader and the man capable of tenderness, the monster everyone feared and the man no one knew. The question now was which one would return to her when the night was over. Time lost meaning in the windowless panic room. Lucy paced the small space, her mind racing between fear for Alexander's safety and frustration at being locked away from the action. The security monitors showed only empty hallways and rooms. The cameras in the areas where conflict might be occurring had been disabled or were being deliberately kept offline to protect her from witnessing anything too disturbing. Hours passed before the heavy security door finally hissed open. Lucy's heart leapt to her throat, relief washing over her as Alexander stepped inside. His appearance, however, stopped her cold. His pristine white shirt was now spotted with blood, a bruise darkening along his jaw, and his eyes held a coldness she hadn't seen before. "Are you hurt?" she asked, crossing to him without thinking. "It's not my blood," he replied flatly, though he didn't stop her when her fingers gently traced the bruise on his face. "What happened?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Marco Bianca sent men to extract you. They failed." The clinical way he delivered this information sent a chill down Lucy's spine. This was the Alexander Moretti the world feared. The man who dealt with threats permanently and without remorse. "Did you?" She couldn't bring herself to finish the question. "They've been handled," he said simply. "But this was just the first move. Bianca will try again with more men and better intelligence." Lucy sank onto the edge of a chair, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. "People could have died tonight because of me." Alexander knelt before her, taking her hands in his. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the violence evident in his appearance. "No," he said firmly. "People could have died tonight because Marco Bianca is a power-hungry opportunist who sees you as a pawn. None of this is your fault, Lucy." She looked into his eyes, searching for the man who had kissed her hours earlier. He was still there beneath the cold exterior of the crime lord, the duality of him both terrifying and compelling. "We need to move you," Alexander continued, rising to his feet. "This location has been compromised." "Where?" "My main residence in the city. It's more heavily fortified, and I need to be there to coordinate our response to Bianca." Lucy nodded, too exhausted to argue. The night's events had drained her, leaving only a numb acceptance in their wake. The journey back to the city passed in tense silence. Alexander worked on his phone, issuing instructions in a language Lucy was too tired to fully translate. Twice, he reached across the seat as if to touch her, only to pull back at the last moment, the barrier between them palpable after what they'd shared and what had followed. Alexander's city residence proved to be a fortress disguised as a luxury penthouse. The entire top 3 floors of a building he owned had been converted into a secure compound with state-of-the-art security, bullet-resistant glass, and a staff that moved with military precision. "You'll stay in the guest suite," Alexander informed her as a stone-faced housekeeper showed her to a beautifully appointed room. "Try to rest. We'll talk in the morning." But rest proved elusive. Every time Lucy closed her eyes, she saw Alexander's blood-spattered shirt, the cold emptiness in his gaze as he'd said, "They've been handled." She'd known intellectually what kind of man he was, what his position demanded, but seeing the aftermath of violence had made it viscerally real in a way she couldn't ignore. Dawn found her sitting on the windowsill, watching the city wake beneath her. New York looked different from this height, smaller somehow, its streets forming the veins and arteries of an organism Alexander controlled from this lofty perch. A soft knock drew her attention. Alexander stood in the doorway, freshly showered and immaculately dressed, no trace of the previous night's violence except for the bruise along his jaw. "You didn't sleep," he observed. "Neither did you," Lucy countered, noting the shadows beneath his eyes. He acknowledged this with a slight nod, entering the room but maintaining a careful distance. "We need to discuss our next steps." Lucy questioned. "I'm still trying to understand how this became my fight." Alexander's expression softened fractionally. "It became your fight the moment Marco Bianca learned of your existence. Whether you want it or not, you're a Rossi, and that name still carries weight in certain circles. So what do we do?" "I've called a meeting of the 5 families," Alexander said, his tone matter-of-fact despite the weightiness of his words. "The first full council in over a decade. Marco Bianca has violated our territorial agreements and peace accords. He'll be held accountable." Lucy stared at him. "Like in The Godfather? That's a real thing?" A ghost of a smile touched Alexander's lips. "Hollywood gets some things right. The council operates as a governing body for disputes between families. Bianca's actions warrant intervention. And what about me? Am I supposed to attend this council meeting?" "No," Alexander said firmly. "Your presence would only inflame the situation, but your name will be acknowledged, your lineage confirmed. The Rossi family will be formally recognized as under Moretti protection." Lucy rose from the windowsill, frustration bubbling up. "So, I just sit here locked away while my fate is decided by a room full of men I've never met?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "This is how our world works, Lucy." "It's not my world," she shot back. "It is now," he replied, his voice gentler than his words. "Whether by choice or circumstance, you're part of this life now. The sooner you accept that, the better equipped you'll be to survive it." Lucy turned away, staring out at the city again. "And if I don't want to just survive, if I want to live?" She felt rather than saw Alexander move closer, the heat of his body suddenly at her back, though he didn't touch her. "Then you adapt," he said quietly. "You learn the rules, then figure out how to bend them without breaking them. That's what your grandmother did." Lucy turned to face him, finding herself mere inches from his chest. "Is that what you do? Bend without breaking?" Alexander's eyes darkened. "I do what's necessary to protect what's mine." The possessive word hung between them, its implications clear. Lucy should have been offended, should have rejected the notion that she belonged to anyone. Instead, she felt a traitorous warmth spreading through her. "I'm not yours," she said, the words lacking conviction even to her own ears. Alexander reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and traced the line of her cheek with his fingertips. "Aren't you?" he murmured. "The moment you walked into my protection, the moment you accepted my help, perhaps even the moment you first looked me in the eye without fear, something changed between us." Lucy wanted to deny it, but the same electric current that had sparked between them the night before hummed beneath her skin at his touch. "This is insane," she whispered. "I barely know you, and yet you know me better than most," he countered. "You see both sides of me, the man and the monster, and you're still here, still looking me in the eye." His hand slid to cup the nape of her neck, gentle despite the strength she knew it contained. Lucy found herself leaning into his touch, her body betraying her mind's misgivings. The council meets tonight, Alexander said, his voice rough. Until then, I need to know you'll stay here where it's safe. And after the council, what then? His eyes held hers, sincere despite their intensity. Then we figure out what this is between us without the immediate threat of Bianca hanging over our heads. It was the closest thing to a declaration she was likely to get from a man like Alexander Moretti. A promise of possibility, a future worth considering. Lucy nodded slowly. I'll stay, but I want updates, Alexander. Real ones. Don't shelter me from the truth of what's happening. A smile touched his lips, a genuine one that transformed his face. Anyone else would be begging for ignorance. I'm not anyone else, Lucy replied simply. No, he agreed, his thumb tracing her lower lip in a touch so gentle it barely registered. You're not. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken desires and complications. Then Alexander stepped back, his expression shifting back to business. Maria will bring you breakfast, he said. I have preparations to make for tonight. Try to rest if you can. After he left, Lucy pressed her fingertips to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his touch. She was falling for a man whose world operated by rules she barely understood, whose power was built on fear and violence, whose enemies wouldn't hesitate to use her against him. It was madness. And yet, when he looked at her with those dark eyes that saw all of her, not just the waitress, not just the Rossi heir, but Lucy herself, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. The day passed slowly, with Lucy alternating between pacing restlessly and poring over her grandmother's journal, piecing together more of the history that had led to this moment. The entries painted a picture of the Rossi family's fall, betrayed from within by someone close to them, someone who had sold information to the Biancs about security protocols and escape routes. By evening, Lucy had developed a theory that made her blood run cold. The betrayal hadn't come from just anyone. The journal hinted that it had been Sophia's own fiancé, a man from a neutral family who had been secretly aligned with the Biancs all along, a man whose surname was eerily similar to Marco Bianca's mother's maiden name. Lucy was about to search for Alexander to share her discovery when Maria appeared at her door, her normally impassive face tight with concern. Mr. Moretti asked me to inform you that the council meeting has been moved up. She said he's already left. Alarm coursed through Lucy. Where is the meeting being held? Maria hesitated, clearly uncomfortable sharing information she considered above Lucy's clearance level. Please, Lucy pressed. It's important. The old Doppoli restaurant in Little Italy. Maria finally relented. It's neutral territory. Lucy's mind raced, connecting the dots that her grandmother's journal had laid out like a chilling roadmap. It wasn't just a change of scenery. The sudden shift in location for the council meeting reeked of something far more sinister. It was a meticulously crafted setup, a trap sprung with the same cruel precision as the one that had decimated the Rossi family decades before. I need to warn Alexander, she declared, her fingers already fumbling for her phone, desperate to pierce through the veil of danger closing in. Maria's headshake was firm, unwavering. Security protocols, Miss Lucy. No phones are permitted during council meetings. Frustration gnawed at her, but Lucy's resolve only hardened. Then I need to go there, to Little Italy. The housekeeper's eyes widened in alarm. Mr. Moretti gave explicit instructions, Miss Lucy. You are not to leave the penthouse under any circumstances. The words hung in the air like a heavy shroud. Lucy met Maria's gaze, her own unwavering. And if I told you his life might depend on me breaking those instructions? A flicker of recognition crossed Maria's face, a silent acknowledgement of the same steely determination she'd witnessed in other strong women who had navigated the treacherous currents of this world. Women who understood that sometimes, rules were made to be broken for the greater good. Maria lowered her voice, her loyalty warring with her fear. The service elevator, she whispered, her gaze darting around as if the walls had ears. Enzo is always stationed at the main entrance, but Carlo at the service entrance. He's new, less vigilant. Relief washed over Lucy, but there was no time to waste. She grabbed her grandmother's journal, its aged pages whispering secrets of the past, and the locket, the cold metal a stark reminder of the photograph it held, a ghost from another era. Thank you, Maria. 20 minutes and one convincingly concocted story later, Lucy found herself hurtling through the city in a taxi, heading towards the heart of Little Italy. The streets were a chaotic tapestry of honking cars and chattering pedestrians, each red light and traffic jam twisting her anxiety tighter. What if she was wrong? What if she was simply succumbing to paranoia, seeing conspiracies where none existed? But her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, a constant mantra. Asterisk, trust the pattern. Asterisk, asterisk, when history repeats itself, it rarely disguises its methods. Asterisk, the old Doppoli restaurant loomed ahead, its windows dark and foreboding, save for a faint, flickering glow emanating from the back room. It was closed to the public for the evening, an ominous sign. Lucy paid the driver, her movements suddenly weighed down by uncertainty. She approached cautiously, the shadows offering a fragile cloak of anonymity. She had no plan, no real strategy, just a burning conviction and a desperate hope. How could she possibly infiltrate a meeting guarded by the security details of 5 powerful crime families? As she hesitated in the darkness across the street, a sleek black car glided to a stop in front of the restaurant, its tinted windows shielding its occupants from prying eyes. A figure emerged, instantly recognizable from the photographs she'd devoured during her research. Marco Bianca. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps only a few years older than Alexander, with the same unsettling aura of lethal elegance. But it was the man who followed him from the car that sent a jolt of ice through Lucy's veins, freezing her in place. Elderly, yet still radiating an aura of power and menace, he matched the faded image in her grandmother's locket with chilling accuracy. Vincenzo Falcone. the man who had been engaged to Sofia Rossi before betraying her family to the Biancs, setting in motion a chain of events that had haunted generations. This wasn't just a meeting. It was an ambush, a carefully orchestrated trap with decades of planning behind it. The realization slammed into her with brutal force. Lucy was frantically considering her limited options when a hand clamped over her mouth from behind, stifling her startled cry. "Don't scream," a woman's voice whispered urgently in her ear, the words barely audible above the city's din. "I'm here to help." The hand slowly released her, and Lucy spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing before her was an elegant woman in her 50s, her silver-streaked dark hair framing sharp, intelligent features that seemed vaguely familiar. "Who are you?" Lucy demanded, instinctively backing away slightly. "Francesca Moretti," the woman replied, her voice carrying a subtle undercurrent of authority. "Alexander's mother. And you are the Rossi girl who has turned my son's carefully ordered world upside down." Lucy stared at her in stunned disbelief. "Alexander said you were in Sicily." A faint smile curved Francesca's lips. "My son prefers to know where everyone is at all times. I prefer to maintain a degree of independence." Her expression hardened, the amusement fading. "Now, tell me why you're here instead of safely locked away in my son's fortress." Quickly, in a flurry of hurried words, Lucy explained her discovery about Falcone's betrayal and her fears about the council meeting, the weight of history pressing down on them both. Francesca's face hardened, the lines around her eyes deepening. History does indeed repeat itself. She glanced around, her gaze calculating. "Come with me." She led Lucy around the block to an unassuming door that appeared to lead to a small apartment above a bakery. Inside, however, was a narrow, dimly lit passage that connected to the restaurant's upper floor. "The original owner was my father's cousin," Francesca explained in a hushed voice as they moved silently through the passage, their footsteps muffled by the old carpets. "The families think they know all the secrets of this place, but some were kept within bloodlines." They emerged into what had once been an office, now dusty and disused, the air thick with the scent of forgotten memories. Through a vent in the floor, they could hear the murmur of voices from the meeting room below, the words carrying an undercurrent of tension. "Insult to all of us," Marco Bianca was saying, his voice smooth as silk, yet laced with venom. "The Moretti family harboring a Rossi without council approval violates the territorial agreements of 1964. The Rossi line was declared extinct." Alexander's voice replied, controlled but with an undercurrent of steel. "The reemergence of an heir falls under legacy protection clauses, not territorial dispute resolution." A convenient interpretation, an older voice Lucy didn't recognize commented, the words dripping with skepticism. "But one that benefits only the Morettis." Lucy glanced at Francesca, who was listening intently, her expression unreadable. "The girl should be presented to the council," another voice insisted. "Let us determine her legitimacy and appropriate status." "The girl," Alexander said, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness, "is under my personal protection. Her legitimacy has been verified through documentation and blood oath records." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room at the mention of blood oaths, sacred bonds rarely invoked in modern times. "Perhaps," the elderly man Lucy had seen with Marco suggested, his voice carrying the weight of years and authority. "This situation calls for a traditional resolution, a union between families to restore balance." Francesca's lips thinned into a tight line. "Vincenzo Falcone," she whispered to Lucy, her voice laced with barely suppressed rage. "Marco's maternal grandfather and the architect of the Rossi massacre. He wants to finish what he started 60 years ago." Below, Alexander's chair scraped back against the floor. "There will be no union. The Rossi heir remains under Moretti protection, as sworn by my grandfather to Antonio Rossi. Any move against her will be considered an act of war against my family." The tension in the room was palpable, even from their hidden vantage point. "Bold words," Marco observed, his voice silky with sarcasm. "But I wonder if the council will support such an aggressive stance when they learn the full truth about your personal interest in the Rossi girl." Lucy felt heat rise to her cheeks as a murmur of speculation filled the room. Even in this world of power and ancient codes, gossip traveled with alarming speed. "My personal affairs are irrelevant to council matters," Alexander stated coldly, his voice like ice. "They become relevant," Vincenzo interjected, his voice a low growl, "when they cloud judgment and threaten the balance we've maintained for generations." What happened next unfolded with startling speed, a chaotic blur of motion and shouting. The door to the meeting room burst open, and armed men flooded in, their faces grim and determined. "Federal agents," a voice shouted above the din, "everyone on the ground now." In the chaos that followed, Lucy couldn't distinguish individual voices or actions, the room dissolving into a maelstrom of shouting and gunfire. Francesca grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the vent. "We need to leave," she hissed, her eyes scanning their surroundings. "Now, Alexander, my son can handle himself," Francesca assured her. "But if you're captured, all of this becomes much more complicated." They retreated through the passage, emerging onto a deserted side street just as sirens began to wail in the distance, their mournful cries echoing through the night. Francesca led Lucy through a maze of narrow alleys and side streets, her movements swift and purposeful, eventually bringing them to a small, unassuming apartment building. "My private residence," she explained as she unlocked the door to a stylish but modest apartment, a stark contrast to the opulent grandeur of the Moretti penthouse. Few people know of its existence, including Alexander. Lucy sank onto a plush couch, the night's events finally catching up with her, the adrenaline beginning to fade. The raid wasn't a coincidence, was it? Francesca shook her head, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter and handing one to Lucy. "Marco Bianca has been under federal investigation for months. Someone tipped off the authorities about the council meeting. A grim smile touched her lips, and I have a strong suspicion who that someone might have been. Lucy took a cautious sip of the drink, wincing at the fiery burn as it slid down her throat. Alexander, Francesca confirmed, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of pride and amusement. Alexander, my son, plays a long game. Marco made his first mistake when he sent men to the lake house, Francesca confirmed. His second was believing Alexander would come to the council meeting unprepared. But Alexander was taken in the raid, too, Lucy pointed out, confusion clouding her features. Francesca's smile widened slightly. Appearances can be deceiving. The authorities have nothing on my son that will stick. His businesses are carefully insulated. But Marco, his operations are less discriminating. Lucy was struggling to process this new layer of complexity when Francesca's phone chimed with a message. The older woman checked it, her expression softening with relief. Alexander is fine, she reported, her voice lighter. Released after questioning. He's furious that you left the penthouse, by the way. Despite everything, Lucy felt a smile tug at her lips. I imagine he is. Francesca studied her thoughtfully, her gaze piercing. You care for my son. It wasn't a question, and Lucy didn't treat it as one. It's complicated. Love in our world always is. Francesca replied with surprising gentleness, her eyes reflecting a lifetime of experience. But sometimes, it's the only thing that keeps us human. Before Lucy could respond, a sharp knock sounded at the door, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Francesca checked the security monitor, then unlocked the door to reveal Alexander, his expression thunderous. Mother? He acknowledged tightly, his voice strained, before his eyes found Lucy, his gaze locking onto hers. The relief that flashed across his face was quickly replaced by anger, a storm brewing beneath the surface. You were supposed to stay at the penthouse. If I had, Lucy replied calmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. You wouldn't know that Vincenzo Falcone was the man who betrayed my grandmother's family 60 years ago, the same man who was setting you up tonight. Alexander's gaze flickered to his mother, who nodded in confirmation. She figured it out from her grandmother's journal, Francesca explained, her voice filled with a quiet pride. Smart girl. Reminds me of Sophia. She never missed a pattern either. Some of the tension left Alexander's shoulders as he moved further into the apartment, his eyes never leaving Lucy's. Marco Bianca has been arrested on multiple federal charges. He informed them, accepting the glass of amber liquid his mother offered. His organization will be in chaos for months, possibly years. Vincenzo managed to avoid arrest, but his influence with the council is severely diminished after tonight's disaster. You're doing? Lucy guessed, a hint of admiration creeping into her voice. A hint of satisfaction gleamed in Alexander's eyes. Let's just say certain evidence found its way to the right federal agents at an opportune moment. And the other families? Francesca inquired, her expression cautious, temporarily disorganized, but ultimately unharmed. Alexander replied, his voice pragmatic. They'll be cautious for a while, focused on their legitimate businesses. The balance of power has shifted in our favor. Lucy absorbed this information, understanding its significance. Alexander hadn't just neutralized a threat. He'd consolidated power, strengthened his position, all while maintaining the appearance of being as vulnerable as his rivals. He'd played the game and he'd won. You risked a lot, she observed quietly, her voice filled with concern. Alexander's eyes met hers, his gaze intense and unwavering. Some things are worth the risk. The weight of his gaze made it clear he wasn't just talking about business strategy. Francesca cleared her throat delicately, breaking the charged silence. I believe I'll retire for the evening. Alexander, the guest room is prepared if you and Lucy wish to stay. 6 months later, Lucy stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander's penthouse. Their penthouse now. Watching snow dust the Manhattan skyline with gentle persistence, the city lights twinkling below like a million fallen stars. The sounds of final preparations for the evening's gathering created a pleasant backdrop of normality, a comforting rhythm that still sometimes felt surreal. So much had changed since that night at Francesca's apartment, the world having been flipped upside down and shaken. Marco Bianca remained in federal custody, his organization dismantled piece by piece through strategic information leaks and cooperation from rivals eager to claim portions of his territory. Vincenzo Falcone had retreated to Sicily, his influence among the families diminished to nearly nothing after Alexander had revealed his role in betraying the Rossis, a violation of the old codes that even the most hardened family leaders couldn't overlook. And Lucy, she had changed perhaps most of all, having shed her skin and emerged anew. Penny, for your thoughts. Alexander's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar, followed by the comforting weight of his arms encircling her waist, pulling her close. Lucy leaned back against him, savoring the solid strength of his chest against her back, just reflecting on how different everything is now. He pressed a soft kiss to the side of her neck, sending a shiver down her spine. Regrets? Not one, she replied honestly, turning in his arms to face him. The Alexander who looked back at her was still the powerful, dangerous man she'd first met at Salvatore. But there was a lightness to him now, a subtle softening that few besides Lucy ever witnessed. In private moments like this, the weight of his position seemed to lift slightly, allowing glimpses of the man beneath the carefully cultivated exterior, the man she had come to love. The first guests will arrive soon, he reminded her, though he made no move to release her, his eyes lingering on her face. Lucy straightened his tie, a gesture that had become comfortingly familiar, a silent expression of her affection. Your mother already called twice to make sure everything is perfect. A smile touched Alexander's lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. She's determined to make this the social event of the season. It's not every day the Moretti family officially introduces a long-lost Rossi heir to society, Lucy pointed out, her voice teasing, and announces an engagement in the process. Alexander's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers, his thumb brushing over the antique ring that had belonged to his grandmother, the diamonds sparkling in the soft light. Are you ready for this? Once we make the announcement public, there's no going back to anonymity. Lucy considered his question seriously, her gaze unwavering. The past months had been a gradual integration into Alexander's world, learning its rules, understanding its power structures, finding her place within its complex hierarchy. She'd expected to feel like an imposter, an outsider pretending to belong, but instead found that certain aspects of this life came to her with surprising naturalness, as if some hereditary memory of being a Rossi had been dormant within her all along, waiting to be awakened. I'm ready, she assured him, her voice firm. Though I still think some of the old traditions are ridiculous. Alexander laughed, the sound still rare enough to delight her, a melody she never tired of hearing. Says the woman who insisted we honor the blood oath with proper ceremony when we announced our engagement to the family council. That was different? Lucy protested with a smile, her eyes sparkling with amusement. That was about respecting history while making it clear I wasn't being claimed as some medieval property transfer. The ceremony she designed had acknowledged the ancient blood oath between their families while establishing that their union was one of equals. Not the fulfillment of an obligation, but a choice made freely by both parties. It had shocked the old guard, forcing them to confront their antiquated views, but it had ultimately earned her their respect, proving she was not a pawn to be manipulated, but a force to be reckoned with. You've changed how things are done, Alexander observed, his voice filled with pride, his eyes reflecting his admiration. Not many could have navigated this world so effectively in such a short time. I had good teachers, Lucy acknowledged, thinking of Francesca's patient guidance and Alexander's careful explanations of the complex web of alliances and rivalries that define their world, the unspoken rules and subtle nuances that govern their interactions. The soft ring of the elevator bell announced the arrival of the first guests, breaking the spell of their private moment. Lucy took a steadying breath as Alexander offered her his arm, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. Shall we, Miss Rivers? He asked, his voice laced with amusement. Or should I say, the last daughter of the Rossi family? Lucy took his arm with a confident smile, her heart soaring. Soon to be Mrs. Moretti. The gathering was small by Moretti standards, only 50 of their closest allies and family members, each carefully vetted and searched before being allowed entry, a testament to the constant threat that loomed over their lives. Lucy greeted guests with growing confidence, no longer the uncertain waitress thrust into a world she didn't understand, but a woman coming into her own power, embracing her heritage, and forging her own destiny. She caught sight of her mother across the room, deep in conversation with Francesca, the two women sharing a comfortable camaraderie that warmed Lucy's heart. That had been perhaps the most challenging aspect of her new life, explaining to her mother the truth about their family history and Lucy's place in Alexander's world. To Lucy's surprise, her mother had admitted to suspecting parts of the story for years, but had honored her own mother's wish to keep Lucy sheltered from their dangerous past. Your grandmother would be proud, a familiar voice commented beside her, pulling her from her thoughts. Donachie, the elderly Italian who had recognized her name at the translation dinner months ago, approached with a glass of champagne in his hand, his eyes twinkling with warmth. She had the same steel in her spine. Lucy accepted the compliment with a gracious nod, her posture regal. Thank you for coming, Doni. Your presence honors us. The old man smiled approvingly at her perfect Italian and formal address, impressed by her grace and poise. The return of the Rossi name to our circles fills an absence many of us have felt for decades. Your great-grandfather was a man of principle in an era when such men were rare. Before Lucy could respond, Alexander appeared at her side, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture both protective and possessive, subtly staking his claim. Don Ritchie, he acknowledged, his voice respectful. I see you've been reminiscing with my fiancé about the old days. The elderly Don inclined his head, his eyes filled with wisdom. Simply expressing my pleasure at seeing old wrongs finally righted. The alliance between Moretti and Rossi was always one of the strongest foundations of our world. As the conversation continued, Lucy observed the subtle dance of respect and power that characterized these interactions, the unspoken messages and hidden meanings that permeated every word. 6 months ago, it would have seemed like a foreign language to her, an impenetrable code. Now, she read the unspoken messages as clearly as if they were subtitled, understanding the complex dynamics at play. The evening progressed smoothly, a carefully orchestrated display of unity and strength, culminating in Alexander calling for attention to make their official announcement, the moment they had both been working towards. With Lucy at his side, his presence radiating confidence and authority, he formally declared their engagement and her recognition as the legitimate heir to the Rossi legacy, silencing any lingering doubts or whispers of dissent. In honor of this union, he concluded, his voice ringing with sincerity, the territories once held by the Rossi family will be restored under joint Moretti-Rossi administration, with profits directed to a foundation established in Antonio Rossi's name, dedicated to supporting victims of organized crime. This announcement caused a palpable stir, a ripple of surprise and speculation spreading through the room. It wasn't just the engagement, which had been widely speculated upon, but the territorial redistribution, which represented a significant shift in the balance of power, a daring move that could either solidify their dominance or ignite a new war. By framing it as a restoration of historical justice rather than a power grab, Alexander had made it difficult for anyone to object without appearing to condone the treachery that had destroyed the Rossis, effectively silencing his opposition. As glasses were raised in toast, a chorus of congratulations filling the air, Lucy caught Alexander watching her with an intensity that still made her breath catch in her throat, the heat in his eyes a silent promise of the passion that burned between them. For all the political maneuvering and strategic advantages their union represented, what existed between them had grown into something neither had expected, something genuine and powerful that transcended the practical considerations of their world. A love forged in the crucible of danger and tempered by shared experiences. Later, when the last guest had departed and they were finally alone, the penthouse silence save for the soft strains of music, Alexander led Lucy to the terrace, where a bottle of chilled champagne waited in an ice bucket, the condensation glistening in the moonlight. To surviving your first official function as the future Mrs. Moretti, he toasted, his voice filled with warmth and affection, clinking his glass against hers. Lucy smiled, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Was I that obvious? Only to me, he assured her, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle and possessive. You were magnificent. Even the old guard was impressed. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their champagne and looking out at the city spread before them like a glittering tapestry. Their city, in many ways, the kingdom they ruled together. When I first met you, Alexander said quietly, his voice barely audible above the city's hum, I asked what you saw when you looked at me, the monster everyone fears, or the man no one knows. Lucy replied, her voice soft, remembering the weight of that question, the challenge it represented. Lucy turned to face him, setting down her glass on the nearby table, her hands reaching up to frame his face, her touch tender. I see you, she said simply, her eyes filled with love and acceptance. All of you, the leader who makes difficult decisions, the protector who honors ancient oaths, the man who loves with the same intensity he brings to everything else. Alexander turned his head, his gaze unwavering, pressing a kiss to her palm, his touch sending a shiver of delight through her. Not everyone could accept both sides. Not everyone had the advantage of understanding what it means to have a dual heritage, Lucy replied, her voice filled with conviction. The waitress and the Rossi heir. We both live in two worlds, and now we've created our own. Something new from something old, Alexander observed, drawing her closer, his arms tightening around her. Lucy leaned into him, savoring the sense of rightness she felt in his arms, the feeling of finally being home. Their path had been unexpected, dangerous at times, but it had led them to a place neither could have anticipated that night at Salvatore, when a simple translation had changed everything, setting in motion a chain of events that had irrevocably altered their lives. Do you ever wonder? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What would have happened if I hadn't been working that night? If you hadn't offered that translation challenge? Alexander considered this for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought, his gaze distant. I believe we would have found each other eventually, he said with unwavering certainty, his eyes meeting hers, his voice filled with conviction. Some connections are inevitable. A blood oath transcending generations, Lucy teased, a playful smile gracing her lips. Something even older and more powerful, Alexander replied, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he reserved only for her, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. Something that makes even men like me believe in fate. As snow continued to fall gently around them, blanketing the city in a pristine layer of white, Lucy stood on tiptoe to kiss the man who had drawn her into his dangerous world, and found himself transformed by her presence in it. The monster and the man, the waitress and the heir, all parts of who they were, now intertwined in a future neither could have imagined. A future filled with love, danger, and endless possibilities. In the distance, the lights of the city twinkled like stars brought down to earth. A kingdom they would navigate together, side by side, hand in hand. Not as Moretti and Rossi, not as crime lord and translator, but simply as Alexander and Lucy, who had discovered that the most unexpected translations are sometimes the most perfect, and that the greatest love stories are often born from the most unlikely beginnings.